Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that feels totally counterintuitive but makes so much sense once you really dig into it, the modern trap of hypervisibility, and how stepping back might actually be your absolute most powerful move. Look, you've been told your whole life that visibility is influence. We're constantly fed this lie that being present means being powerful, and that going silent is basically social suicide. But our source material completely flips that narrative. It argues that society has tricked you into becoming a commodity, something that's always available, always reachable, and eventually always ignored. So how do we actually break free from this matrix?
We kick things off with a stark realization straight from the text. The greatest mistake of the modern era is our sheer addiction to being seen. As the source bluntly puts it, when you are everywhere, you are nowhere. It calls this the inflation of the self. Think about it. Just like printing way too much money completely devalues a currency, projecting your presence everywhere all the time totally tanks your personal brand and your influence.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the hyperpresence trap and this whole illusion of influence.
The text defines our current digital condition as hyperpresence. And let's be real, it's an incredibly exhausting state to be in. You're suffering from this right now if you feel like you're trying to hold up the sky for people who, frankly, wouldn't even notice if you disappeared tomorrow. The source uses this absolutely brilliant metaphor. You become a high-status engine running on low-status fuel. By making yourself constantly accessible, you're just a constant variable in everyone else's day, completely draining your own energy reserves for zero return.
And honestly, this illustrates perfectly how everyday habits are actively leaking the very mystery that makes you magnetic in the first place. Every single time you post just for the sake of being seen, or you respond instantly to some trivial text message, or you just kind of linger in a room, whether physical or digital, where you really aren't required, you are actively devaluing your brand. You're literally giving your presence away for free.
Moving on to Section 2, let's look at the economics of you, supply and demand.
Think about the clinical reality of power for a second. Scarcity creates undeniable value and mystery. Familiarity? Well, that breeds contempt. If you're constantly there, the text argues you aren't even viewed as a complex person anymore. You just become background noise. Worse, you devolve into a tool that is totally taken for granted until it breaks. When you operate with scarcity, your words carry actual weight. But when you operate with overfamiliarity, people just tune you out.
So what's the alternative? Let's check out Section 3, Elite Strategy and the Sovereign Mind.
There's this really fascinating divide highlighted here. The masses, they are absolutely terrified of being forgotten. They're constantly screaming into the algorithm, just begging for a fleeting moment of validation. But the sovereign mind, the elite, they do not broadcast their every move. They understand the heavy weight of absence. They know that isolation is actually the laboratory of power. So while everyone else is out there making noise, they are quietly building their empire in the dark.
And this is absolutely crucial. Stepping away from the noise isn't social suicide. Actually, scratch that. It is a vital strategic necessity for true impact. When you vanish, you force the world to imagine where you are. You don't lose power, you consolidate it. As the text so profoundly notes, being forgotten by the masses is actually the first necessary step toward being remembered by history.
Now, how exactly do we pull this off? Let's get into Section 4, Weaponizing Absence and Building the Phantom Frame.
The text outlines a clear process of ascension here, and it begins with a strategic withdrawal. First things first, you've got to stop trading your valuable time for cheap attention. Second, and this is a big one, do not announce your departure. No grand exit speeches. You simply evaporate from the spaces where your energy is no longer respected. By doing this, you're making a massive shift. You go from trading your time for likes to trading your silence for leverage.
Let's look at the fallout of this in Section 5, the psychological audit and creating a vacuum.
Okay, so when you just vanish without explanation, you basically initiate a psychological audit on everyone around you. The immediate effect? It creates a cognitive vacuum. The people who took you for granted suddenly feel the weight of what they've lost, and they'll instinctively reach out. But get this, the text warns us that they aren't reaching out because they suddenly care so much. They're reaching out of a desperate need to restore their own equilibrium. They're just trying to fill that psychological vacuum you left behind with their own theories and their own fears.
So when they inevitably reach out to restore their balance, the source material advises a very strict rule. You must hold the frame. Now, I know this is the hardest part for most people, but do not rush back in to soothe their insecurity. You have to let the silence do the heavy lifting. That silence, that's your leverage working for you in real time. Which brings us to our final core concept in Section 6,
the architecture of power, and artificial scarcity.
By applying this law of artificial scarcity to yourself, you instantly multiply your value. Because you're speaking less, your words actually become edicts. Your rare appearances, they're no longer just routine check-ins, they're treated as monumental events. You are no longer just participating in their matrix, instead you're forcing them to navigate your void. You are the one setting the terms of engagement.
The ultimate directive here is to protect your energy. The source beautifully refers to this as your metabolic gold. It is incredibly precious, guys. Stop giving it away in the noise. Just vanish. Let them wonder where you are. Let them hunt for your attention instead of you just serving it up on a silver platter.
Ultimately, when you execute this strategy, you ensure that when you finally do choose to return, when you step back into the light, you dictate the very architecture of the space you inhabit. You don't come back as just another participant, scrambling for attention. No way. You return as the architect of the whole environment.
It's time to stop being the noise. So, I'll leave you with this. Are you going to continue being that exhausting background frequency? A commodity that's always available and eventually just ignored? Or are you ready to claim the power of absence and become the silence that demands an explanation? The choice is entirely yours.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a truly fascinating, almost hidden dynamic that honestly governs just about every single interaction in our modern world. We're going to explore the clinical reality of power, presence, and visibility. We've been taught a very specific way to exist in this digital age, but the source material we're looking at today, it completely flips that script. So get ready to totally rethink how you spend your time, your energy, and, most importantly, your availability. When you are everywhere, you are nowhere. Okay, let's really dive into this. Just let that sink in for a second. Our sources pinpoint the absolute greatest mistake of the modern era as our total addiction to being seen. We've experienced this massive inflation of the self, right? Because we literally can be connected to everyone, everywhere, all at once. We kind of feel compelled to actually do it. But here's the catch. By spreading ourselves so unbelievably thin across every platform, every text thread, every room, our actual presence loses all its weight. You see, society has kind of tricked us. We've been sold what we'll call the modern lie. This idea that visibility automatically equals influence. That being constantly present means you're powerful, and that going silent is, well, basically social suicide. But the clinical reality? It's entirely different. In the cold, unfeeling reality of power and human psychology, scarcity is what creates value. It's a fundamental economic law, and it applies perfectly to human attention. When you're always available, you just become a commodity. And commodities that are literally everywhere, they eventually just get ignored. So this brings us to a diagnosis for modern life. Hyperpresence. It's the state of being a commodity that is always available, always reachable, and eventually always ignored. Now, what's really interesting about this is, if you're feeling constantly exhausted lately, this is exactly why. You're out here trying to hold up the sky for people who probably wouldn't even notice if you disappeared tomorrow. You've commodified your own attention to the point where your presence is simply expected rather than actually valued. And that brings us to a painful but absolutely necessary realization. You are a high-status engine running on low-status fuel. Seriously, think about what happens when you linger in rooms, whether they're digital or physical, where your presence isn't actually required. Every single time you post just for the sake of being seen or instantly reply to some trivial message just to prove you're there, you are actively devaluing your own brand. You're leaking that mystery that makes you magnetic, burning high-performance energy on super low-value interactions. So it's absolutely crucial to understand the real cost of being a constant variable in someone else's day. It means you become background noise. You're taken for granted until broken, and responding instantly devalues your brand. Like the old saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt. When you are always there, you stop being viewed as a dynamic person, and you kind of morph into just background noise. Worse, you become a tool. And what do we do with tools? We take them for granted until they break. Section 1, Scarcity and the Self. Observing the elite. Let's shift our perspective for a moment and look at how the top tier operates, because there is a stark contrast here. The masses are terrified of being forgotten. That fear drives all the endless posting, the constant noise, the sheer desperation for cheap attention. But the sovereign mind, the individual who truly gets leverage, they know that being forgotten by the noisy masses is actually how you end up being remembered by history. They understand the heavy weight of absence. When you vanish, You force the world to imagine where you are. Section 2. The strategic withdrawal. So if you want to change your dynamic, the ascension begins with the strategic withdrawal. You've got to stop trading time for cheap attention and start trading silence for leverage. Here are the rules of vanishing. Number 1, do not announce. There's no need for some dramatic exit speech. Number 2, do not explain. Explanations are really just a subtle way of asking for permission. And number 3, evaporate. You just simply quietly remove yourself from the spaces and dynamics where your energy is no longer respected. Section 3. The phantom frame. To really weaponize your absence, you have to master the architecture of a phantom frame. This isn't about throwing a tantrum or giving people the silent treatment, right? It's a strategic repositioning. So ask yourself, who will notice the cognitive vacuum? When you stop holding up the sky, who actually notices? By stepping back, you initiate a psychological audit on those around you, testing the reality of the people who've been taking you for granted. And here is exactly how that psychological audit plays out. First, they feel the weight of loss. Then, they reach out to restore equilibrium. But here's the key, do not rush back to soothe insecurity. The people who took you for granted will suddenly feel that massive void. They're gonna reach out, but be careful, it's usually not out of care, but out of a desperate need to fix their own equilibrium. This is the exact moment you absolutely must hold the frame. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of artificial scarcity of the human soul. It's restricting access to your presence to instantly multiply its value. Just like diamonds or rare art, you stop being this free, endlessly available commodity, and you start becoming a truly rare asset. When you apply this law, your entire relationship with the world transforms. Your words become edicts. Your rare appearances are treated as events. You are no longer navigating their matrix, You are successfully forcing them to navigate your void. Section 4. Return as the architect. Vanishing isn't just a psychological game. The sovereign individual understands that isolation is actually the laboratory of true power. You retreat to build. Look at them, out there screaming into the algorithm, desperately trading their dignity for a fleeting moment of attention, versus you, quietly building the empire in the dark. Doing this requires a fierce, honestly, almost ruthless dedication to your own resources. Protect your metabolic gold, your energy, your focus, your time. These are literally the most precious commodities you possess. Don't just hand them over to people or platforms that drain you and offer nothing but low-status fuel. Guard your gold. Vanish from the noise. You have to completely remove yourself from that exhausting, endless fray of constant visibility. Just step right out of the static. Let them wonder. Let them hunt. Embrace the undeniable magnetic power of mystery. When you create that psychological vacuum, let people fill it with their own theories and a newfound respect for your boundaries. The pursuit they engage in, it's only going to solidify the value of your presence. You will not be a participant. You will be the architect. When you finally choose to step back into the light, you'll do so entirely on your own terms. You will have successfully traded silence for real leverage. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to think about. Where in your life do you need to evaporate from today? And what empire are you going to build in the dark?